You can see this right here is Porto. It's called Porto because it comes from a specific region in Portugal where they make this. It's only in this place, it's the only place that can actually call it Porto. Everywhere else has to label their thing as a port. In college, we are forced to drink on a budget, which leads many to miss out some of the finer, sophisticated drinks, such as this one right here, which is Porto. I've done research into this drink, extensive research into this drink, and I've actually spoken to one of my friends who's been to this region and actually got to see all the processes that was used in making it. In today's speech, you'll be treated to the history of Porto, how it is made, and the many different types of Porto that you can taste. Let me begin with the old history of Porto. The history of Porto is old. It came from the early 17th century, from the Douro region in Portugal. In 1678, Britain and France went to war, and the British soon blockaded most French ports. This caused a massive shortage of French wine from British, and they weren't very happy about that. They immediately looked towards Portugal, who was a long-standing trading partner of them. But Portugal had problems in the sense of the Portuguese wine was not as tasty or up to standards as that of the French. And the British soon took control of the wine-producing countries. But even still, with the British under control, the Porto coming out of Portugal was not that good, and the the popularity of port would fluctuate based on the relationship with France at the time. The real expansion of Porto came in the 18th and the 19th centuries from the Methuen Treaty, in which Britain and Portugal agreed to exchange goods, with the English sending Portugal bolts of cloth in exchange for pipes of port wine. No one knows exactly where port came from or when it was started, but the popular story is that in 1678, a wine merchant from Liverpool sent his sons to Portugal looking for new wine fields in which to expand to. While there, the sons visited a monastery where they saw monks add brandy to wine during the fermentation process. Either way, that's the popular story. Either way, by the end of the 1600s, Porto merchants were adding brandy to their wines in order to stop fermentation. The wine, this would cause the wine to stay very sweet and would give it a fruitiness flavor, and it would also make it considerably stronger than normal wine. In the 1730s, Porto came under attack by a lot of counterfeits who would take sugar and elderberry juice and add it to their wine in order to try to mimic the flavor of an actual Porto. The Marquise de Pombal, who was in control of the region at the time, created the Old Wine Company, which under their charter allowed them to regulate the qualities produced. They got to fix the max and minimum prices at which port could be bought or sold, and they arbitrated all disputes. They also created a specific place in which port could be produced, the Douro region, and they actually tore up all other places that port was being produced during the time. Since then, it's stayed the same throughout the years, and Porto continues to be produced from the Douro region. Now that you know the history of port, the ability to produce it is something that's very important and takes years to master. Port is a blend of different berries. It's never produced from one type of, or from different grapes. It's never one single type of grape. It's a mixture. And you start off the process just like any normal wine, in which you create fermentation of the grapes and start creating the wine. Now the true change in the process is when you add a neutral wine to the wine, and it stops the fermentation process and gives the wine a sweet, fruity flavor. Most port is around 20% alcoholic. Porto is stored in large barrels and normally in cellars. The microclimate of cellars brings out the best of the port flavors and gives it a good, and it allows it to age properly. All port is aged for a minimum of 3 years. Wine monitors monitor the age, and they create blends of port in order to make new flavors and produce that on a large scale production. The process of making port is essential to the different types and tastes that are created. Port has many different flavors and styles, much like wine, and there are 4 main categories. The first category is white port, which is a combination of white grapes, and it's made exactly like the red port, but just with white. It's not very popular, and you're supposed to drink it slightly chilled and as a precursor to the meal. Ruby port, which this is the most common of port and has several harvests blended together and has aged for a minimum of 3 years. This is normally used to drink right off the bat. You can drink it right away. The tawny port is a port that is red and has been allowed to age for longer than 3 years, normally between 3 extra years to 40 extra years. And it's brownish reddish color, and it has a dry, nutty flavor to it. The full vintage is aged, is a port that is only aged when the Instituto de Vinho de Porto declares that there's a special year of the harvest. There's only about 1 to 2% of all ports that can be considered vintage, and it generally happens only 3 times every decade. With port rich in tradition and catering something to everyone, you should take this opportunity to expand your horizons. With the conclusion of today's speech, I hope that everyone here feels that they have learned something about Porto. Whether it's the history of Porto and how it came to be a sought-after drink, the long process of making and aging the bottles perfectly, or the 4 major types that cater to the palate in any sense. So when you're looking for something smooth and flavorful wine to have over candlelit meal with loved one, think of the speech and remember Porto from Portugal.